Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the panel number 3B on promotion of social enterprises as an alternative approach to enhancing responsible and sustainable growth. As you have just seen in the video, COVID has put a number of issues on our plate that we have to deal. And according to many of the researchers and a lot of policy research that we have been also conducting, social enterprises and inclusive businesses are really crucial in order to get out from this crisis in a more resilient manner. Inclusive business has become a global component, and a few years ago, the G20 has already developed inclusive business framework. Several years ago, ASEAN has also adopted the ASEAN Inclusive Business Framework. What is important and what we can learn from that document is that there are several approaches to implementing inclusive business models. First approach is focused very much on the scaled up inclusive business models. It is when the enterprises include the poor, the bottom of the pyramid, or bottom 40, as it is known in many countries in ASEAN, into a company's supply chains as employees, producers, and business owners, or develop affordable goods and services developed for the poor. But then there are two other approaches, and one of these approaches is focused on the IB activities. IB activities of generally larger companies, which can be integrated through the responsible business conduct or corporate social responsibility programs. And a third approach is focused on the social enterprise initiatives. These initiatives can be scaled up to become business models and are really important because very often this is the initiatives where there's a lot of innovation that happens and a lot of new business models could be tested. What has happened, today we're in the 4th ASEAN Inclusive Business Forum, that the previous forums mainly focused on the inclusive business models, but we also want to cover issues related to the IB approaches as well as social entrepreneurship. And that's why we have the session here today, where we want to speak with the distinguished panelists about the elements which policymakers should take into account when designing programs for social enterprises in order to help them scale up and to become these inclusive businesses. And I'm very, very happy to have 4 really distinguished speakers with us today. And let me introduce you to them briefly. So first of all, we have Ms. Amal Chevreau, who is a policy analyst, who is my colleague, and who is a very knowledgeable expert in the area of social economy and social entrepreneurship. Amal has been working on the subject of social entrepreneurship for several years and has authored a number of reports. She also teaches the social economy in Paris-Dauphine University. And prior to joining the OECD, she has been leading the research unit at the Institute of Economic Perspectives of Mediterranean and has held senior positions in the government of Morocco. Amal, would you like to turn your camera and tell us where you're connected from?
Good morning, everyone. Connecting from Paris and extremely glad and happy to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Amal. We'll go with questions a bit later. I'm also very pleased to have as a speaker Mr. Dispanada Diskul, or Duke, if you allow me, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Mae Fa Luang Foundation under the royal patronage based in Thailand. He leads foundation social business under the Dai Tung brand and comprising handicrafts, foods, horticulture, and tourism. Duke is at the forefront of social enterprise initiatives in Thailand because he's one of the co-founders and a chairman of the Social Enterprise Thailand Association. Duke is a real leader and was selected for the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader in 2013 and Asia 21 Young Leader. Duke, would you like to put on your camera and tell us where you're connecting with us from?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually connecting not very far away from Bangkok, Thailand.
Thank you very much. We'll speak to you later. The third speaker is Ms. Fei Cho, who is the Asia Director for Cacao Sustainable Sourcing in Mars. And Ms. Fei has been working for many years in Mars and have been collaborating with over 70,000 smallholder farmer families in Indonesia and the Philippines. And she has launched a number of very interesting initiatives. I hope we will hear about that today. Interestingly, she has been working on all range of issues related to farming of cacao planting, from research towards working directly with farmers and helping them to implement innovations into their world. Very good afternoon, Faye. Where are you calling from to this meeting?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I'm very excited to share some of our learnings and journey through the years. I'm calling in from Singapore, but in body, I'm here, but my spirit, I am everywhere in Indonesia. I miss the countries that I work in the Philippines. And, you know, it was so nice to see the opening video for ASEAN and, you know, the spirit of solidarity that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. I relate to you very much. We really miss this travel and meeting with friends and colleagues and people on the ground, which is very, very important for us. And finally, I am also very pleased to welcome Gil Gonzalez, who is an executive director of ASEAN Business Advisory Council. We have been collaborating with Gil for many years, and he is leading the body mandated by the ASEAN leaders that pursues the strategic goals under the AEC Blueprint 2025. Gil has developed a number of skills over this period, and he currently works on delivering the Council's numerous policy reform recommendations on issues related to trade facilitation, financial integration, but also on issues related to inclusive business. Hello, Gil. Nice to see you here. From where do you connect with us?
Thank you, Max. Thank you for having me. I'm calling from Manila, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone.
Thank you very much, Gil. So as you see, we're really having a very international panel, and I'm really excited to kick in with the discussions, and we have a number of questions to ask to all of the panelists. The structure of the session will be that we will ask 1 or 2 questions to each panelist individually, but then we will create a round table, and we look forward to questions coming from you, from the various colleagues and stakeholders who are joining us here today. Don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat so that we all can see them, and we will try to answer them as much as possible and as much as time allows. Now, I will turn to Amal, my colleague, and Amal has been working a lot, as I already mentioned, on issues related to social entrepreneurship and other related things. Amal, I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit the difference between social enterprise, inclusive business, corporate social responsibilities, or do they have something in common? Are they, what is so particular about the social ventures, and what do policymakers do so particular about these types of ventures? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max. And let me start again by thanking you and thanking the organizers for having me with you today. As you have said, we at the OECD, we have been working on the topic of social entrepreneurship and social enterprises and social economy for the last 25 years. And as a matter of fact, we just had an amazing week last week with the first OECD high-level conference under the umbrella of the global action of the OECD on the social economy. So what I can share, and we will be sharing highlights of this conference very soon, and we can share with you all the links that you can learn more about our work. So getting back to your question.
Amal, sorry, I was wondering if you could put down your microphone a little bit, because it's a little bit difficult for us to hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Much better. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Max. I was just saying that we will be putting on our website the highlights of the huge conference we had last week, sorry, on the social economy, so that you can learn more about our work. We have been working on the area of social economy, social enterprises, social innovation, social entrepreneurship for the last 25 years. And we would be more than happy to share the best practices and examples that we have gathered from around the world with ASEAN countries. So getting back to your question, Max, indeed, I think there is a variety of concepts that evolve all around doing good or trying to achieve a social mission through business. But indeed, or through an economic activities and ventures. But inclusive business is not social entrepreneurship, is not corporate social responsibility, because these are concepts that may have sometimes points in common, but they're very much a bit distinct as concepts. So to start with inclusive business, as you have reminded everyone in the beginning of the session, the guidelines or the reference or the explanation of what inclusive business is was developed under the G20 guidance, and then afterwards many regions have developed their own guidance, like the ASEAN region. So it mainly refers to business that provide goods and services that operate on a commercially viable basis, that can scale or are scalable, as you said, and these goods and services are directed to people that are at the base of the economic pyramid. So this is a specific type of business, but the element maybe that links it to the other stream that maybe we will be talking about today, which is social entrepreneurship, is the social mission, is the target groups and the inclusivity side of this business. Corporate social responsibility is a completely different topic and concept, I would say. It's more related, it's more of a management concept whereby firms integrate social and environmental and more societal challenges and concerns within their business behaviors and activities. And it places what we call the emphasis on what's known as the triple bottom Alice or line, which is trying to reconcile economic, social, and environmental issues. Social enterprises are specific ventures or firms that have different legal forms, and we will go into that later on in the discussion. These are private companies or private activities conducted by people or by collectives of people in the public interest with an entrepreneurial approach. But the main objective of the activities is not maximization of profits, but more social, achieving more of a social mission or a social goal. So, for instance, I can give you the example of the EU region, where there is a unified somehow definition of what a social enterprise is through the Social Business Initiative that was adopted back in 2011, where you have to have 3 dimensions to identify what a social enterprise is. So you have to have the international, the entrepreneurial approach, the democratic approach, meaning the way the enterprise is governed, and you have also specific rules on distribution of profits and how the social concerns or the social mission is integrated within the business model and the governance model. So this is in a very, let's say, very brief and concise nutshell, the main differences between these 3 concepts. Of course, you can have here and there a couple of intersections between these 3 businesses, but at the end of the day, these are concepts that are developed, and they're different approaches and different concepts, and entail different different policy environments to be put in place.
Thank you very much, Amal. I think it's very interesting, but I think one thing probably which is worth mentioning is that all these approaches are still very relevant to combating the consequences of COVID, and they are all very much needed. And each of them can bring additional added value to that, right?
Absolutely. And we have conducted research that was co-signed basically by Max and another colleague of mine, Julie Rijpens, on the consequences of COVID, on the current role and the future role of social economy and social enterprises, which are part of the social economy. And we have found that the element of inclusion, the element of adaptability or the capacity of adaptability of these enterprises to major crisis, and we have different examples of this throughout the financial crisis, for instance, through 2008 and everything. These specific characteristics of social enterprises make them, very efficient tools to come back to, first of all, address the urgent needs of people during crises such as COVID, and then to also offer opportunities to reconstruct and rebuild better as we are all getting out of the current crisis.
Thank you very much, Anil. I just want to mention that very often in some cases, some of the social enterprises could be inclusive business, because today in an earlier discussion, there was a representative of RAISE of Singapore who is promoting social enterprises in Singapore, who mentioned that out of all of their members of about 360, about half are actually inclusive businesses, and that they really work a lot on their scaling. But that's an interesting discussion, and maybe I will have a few more questions to you, but maybe later on. And meanwhile, I would like to turn to Mr. Duke Dispul, who is, as I mentioned, operates a social business, which is very, very interesting. And I was wondering, Duke, if you could tell us a bit more about the Taitung as a social business operated by the Mei Fung Ling Foundation, what it is and how it all started. Because I think it's a good example for social entrepreneurship promotion and very inspiring one.
Right, thank you. Well, the foundation is actually based in Thailand, and we are now, next year will be 50-year-old. It is founded by the prince's mother, or the mother of the late king, so she would be the grandmother of the current king. 30 years ago, a little bit more than 30 years ago, back in 1988, when the prince's mother was at the age of 88 years old, she founded this project, Taitung Development Project, where we wanted to help people who are in the marginalized community to live a dignified life. And so that becomes the basis of what we're trying to do. And when we went to the area, we found out that there's a lot of problems with opium cultivation, poverty, human trafficking, people working in the sex industry. And we found that in order to transform the area, business is actually critical to long-term sustainable growth. And from there, we kind of started our development programs, which turned out to become this brand Taitung, and now 5 businesses that we operated. We have cafe, food business, handicraft, tourism, and agriculture. So the whole concept of this is trying to provide people with licit livelihood, and in return, when people are able to sustain themselves, they are able to look after the community, and they are able to look after the forest. Since our inception 30 odd years ago, we are able to transform the area where over 70% has been barren land to become like a full forest. We have registered carbon credit from the area, which we will be able to offset our carbon footprint. And last year, due to COVID, our revenue is slightly down a bit, but we have been financially self-sustained since 2001. Last year, our revenue is about $13.6 million US. We have about 1,800 employees, of which 1,300 are hired locally. The area is 150 square kilometers, 11,000 people, 6 different ethnic groups. So we employ slightly over 10% of the local people in the area, and they're of all ages, from young all the way to older generations working together in the area. So I think this is where we're kind of the basis of how we found ourselves, and later on when they started to coin the the social business concept or social enterprise concept, and we kind of fit into that sphere. Lately, we have been trying to grow our businesses, trying to strengthen our business platform. So we've started working with international partners. We've been working with IKEA since 2007. We have been working with Muji from Japan. We have a lot of business with Japan. And in our food department, we also grow coffee. So our coffee is actually served on board of Japan Airlines on flight from Thailand to Japan. And last year we had first global launch collaboration with Onitsuka Tigers, Japanese brand shoes under ASIC umbrella. So they're all under sustainability theme. I think that this is there's a lot of business looking for players or doers who are working seriously and trying to address these kind of issues, and they somehow found us to be quite a fit with their company mission and vision. So we use them as a platform for us to grow further, to be able to also help more people and to create long-lasting and sustainable impact in the community.
Thank you very much. It's very inspiring. Actually, I realized I might have drunk coffee that you have provided to Japanese airlines, or used some of the products from IKEA. Just as a follow-up question, from your experience, how did this partnership start? Did you go to these organizations, or they actually reached out to you searching for sustainable sourcing?
I think it's a bit of both. We, with IKEA, they established their social entrepreneur concept. They wanted to work with social enterprises, and then when they started combing social enterprises in different regions, then our name came up. For Japan Airlines, it's more of an introduction through a mutual friend. For Onitsuka Tiger, we just sent them an email and said, we wanted to work with you. We believe in where you're heading, and then we just kind of like started the conversation. With Muji is pretty much the same. I think that it started up with the Thailand team knowing about us, and then we worked with the Thai teams, and then eventually we met with the headquarters, and we were able to get some conversation going.
And sorry, just one more question before we move on. Do you think that companies came to you, to your organization, because you have a high level support, because you're a well-known organization, you have many years of experience, or was it that you had to do some accreditation in order to prove with facts as well the good purposes that you are doing?
I think it's a little bit of both. When we're running a social enterprise, we try to run it as a normal business. So the whole baggage of transparency, all the quality, all the accreditations, we have to be able to compete with other normal product in a competitive market. So once we're able to do that, I think that when people heard about or hear about our social contribution, our environmental contribution, it adds a whole new dimension, which makes the business a hell of a lot more sexy than a traditional business. And I think that's how we're able to gain traction, especially in today's market, where you hear a whole lot of terminologies like ESG, BCG. It even makes social business, social enterprises more attractive for the multi national companies.
Thank you very much, Duke. We will speak about this a little bit later, but meanwhile, I wanted to shift to Ms. Fei. Ms. Fei, you've just heard that one of the social enterprises that large organizations, multinationals like yours, refer to. And we're very happy to hear your perspective on this, because you're representing, of course, one of the biggest companies in the world, very large company in the world. So I was wondering if you could maybe say how private or for-profit companies be collaborating with social enterprises or local communities, because I think some interesting examples.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would say that sustainability is integral as a business decision to how we do business at Mars. And the foundation of this is, you can see in our website, the Mars Sustainable in a Generation plan, where as a business, we are committed to transforming the business for positive change for people and for planet. Our actions to drive sustainability are rooted in our Mars purpose. We believe that the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. And words alone will not be able to bring about this future state, and that it has to be followed up with deeds. So we are increasingly challenging ourselves to every day to do our part to bring this future that we want to life. You know, it is a journey that we are on. As to the question about why private companies it's an obvious answer. We have to, as you know, Duke has mentioned, if we want to build a more inclusive ecosystem from the outside to have a sustained long-term impact, for us, why we would do it is simply the resilience of our future supply. You know, we see unless and until communities and farming communities can find sustaining livelihoods from growing cocoa and other raw materials we need, we will not have future supplies. So it's not CSR for us, it's simple, you know, business strategy. And the way we do it is this concept, our principle of putting the farming family first. And if we were to put them at the center and then solutions are then built by and for them, how can we do it collectively, right? So there are some underlying principles that the farming families and communities are active champions in the development of solutions for their own material and social progress. The other one that exists abundantly in communities that we work with in Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, is this concept of social capital. Very high social capital exists in all of these communities. The trust network, the ability for cohesive and collective action is very strong in a lot of these communities. And that there is a natural desire in wanting to help others and see others to be successful as well as us. So it's this collective prosperity is something that's quite apparent in a lot of these rural farming communities we work with. Now, so if we sort of took that lens, it is very clear that solutions have to be built by and with the local communities. And the purpose then of businesses is to, and in the way I'm just quoting what Grant Reed, our CEO, said this morning in a workshop, is that purpose without performance or profit is, you know, not sustaining. You can't use the profit to be reinvested back in the communities. And similarly, a purpose without performance, you are unable, it's not sustaining. But then performance without purpose is meaningless and pointless, you know. So and because we are a business, we are in it for the long term. These social entrepreneurs are really the key to our collective success. And I'd like to ask we're going to show you some videos and links to an example of a concept we've developed in Indonesia, which is called the Cocoa Doctor Network, which we were struggling with how do we put at scale affordable quality seedlings and planting material in the villages where it's most needed. And we created what we call a service delivery model. So we invested a lot from our research into what we call a Cocoa Academy, and really thought about how we could build human capacity in setting up these nurseries and models all across networks in Sulawesi. And they then these highly trained business farmers, we call them cocoa doctors. They then provide the local extension and the inputs, the high quality planting material and inputs to the farmers in their community. And so these networks have now grown into a capacity of 25 million seedlings a year. And they also provide the extension and the coaching services that farmers sorely need. So I just think that working, with and for the communities is simply a long-term and sustaining approach to take, and that it's something that is obvious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. And I think the particularity of what you have just mentioned is very interesting, because I can imagine that for a large company, it's not easy to identify small enterprises and to reach. It might be easier to identify larger, well, better known social enterprises. So what you have done, from what I understand, is you have launched campaigns in order to identify these tiny entities, farmers on a ground, and make them grow from that perspective, right?
Yes, so we work across a network of, in many programs across about 70,000 farmer base. Now, when you are in the process of training and working with this farmer, whether in a farmer field school or in some other, you start to, select the high, sort of, I call the ones that have potential to not only want to develop themselves, but really see that they want to develop others as well. And that education and knowledge and the right package will be able to enable that. So as a company, we thought, let's provide that training and very high level training and that coaching and the accompaniment that's required for them to start up, to then reach out to farmers, give them the tools and the capability to do it. And over time, that expands. It's like a hub and spoke model, right? And that's been, when you work with farmers, it's, you got to keep your eyes and ears out to, who are the ones that are these, so I call the game changers. And the other thing is then, how can we as businesses and governments provide the enabling environment and the support, but also then let them just go and do their thing. And like in light of COVID now, when we are limited in terms of movement, we see the training still continue because they are from the village. They are still interacting with their villages. So we can continue actually activities despite COVID, that the training and coaching doesn't stop. Yes, we have had to limit the numbers, but clearly we're still able to operate in many sense of the word and get the extension support out.
Thank you very much, Faye. I will come back to you again on this question about the frameworks and what needs to be picked up in order to support organizations like yours to do more initiatives like that. But meanwhile, I wanted to turn to Hill. So I know that, Hill, you represent basically the captains of the industry of ASEAN. ASEAN Business Advisory Council is something which is fairly important in each. You have a structure in each of the ASEAN member states. And you have been hearing probably a lot of interesting discussions coming from the business leaders of these countries. I was wondering, what does an organization like yours do in the area of inclusive business, social entrepreneurship, and if you can maybe give some concrete examples.
Thank you, Max. Well, the ASEAN BAP was created in 2003, and you're correct. They are composed of business leaders and business icons that shape the direction of the economy. Now, as you know, inclusive business wasn't in the radar screen 4 or 5 years ago. In my corporate lifetime, I've heard of CSR, even social enterprises. But I guess what hit the mark, especially when the council heard about it, was really inclusive business. Because the very principle of, being able to engage those belonging to the bottom of the pyramid is not simply because it's a good feeling or you're being altruistic, but as mentioned by Faye, it's essential a business strategy. So we look at Duke and Faye as this inclusive business is like an iceberg. So what I heard today, Duke and Faye, is as if they belong to the tip of the iceberg. So those who are championing IBAN social enterprises. But what the council sees is how do you transform those who are underneath the tip of the iceberg, the 75%? How do you convince them, or what will make them advocate the principles of inclusive business? Because as mentioned, this is a this is a strategy that precisely should make you viable. At the end of the day, there's profit because that's the number one responsibility of any business, to create economic value. So ASEAN BAC, as based on its mandate, is mandate now to replicate something that it wants to promote, to multiply the face and the dukes of this world, having a platform where they can share experiences, and from there Asianize. So also getting the advice and inputs from our knowledge partners and strategic partners, our dialogue partners like you, Max, OECD, and so on, everybody, so that we could deepen inclusive business and make it as part of the new normal. So since this is our 4th ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit, we are looking forward to the 5th, wherein we could really launch that platform. Now, from the ASEAN Business Council side, we have established what we call AIBA. This is the ASEAN Responsible and Inclusive Business Alliance. Companies who have bought into the principle and wants to do more and wants to multiply. But I guess a missing link in our model is we need to have precisely now the captains of the industries, the big boys, the conglomerate, because at the end of the day, they provide a demand. And we've been trying to analyze, okay, there's the big boys and you have those belonging to the bottom of the pyramid. They in principle want to embrace those belonging to this section of the economic pyramid ladder. But their main question is, how do we mentor? How do we make them ready to be able to become productive, either productive agents of the economy, either as a provider, as a worker, or whatever have you, to become part of the supply chain. So to complement that platform, the AIBA, we also have another platform, which is the ASEAN Mentorship for Entrepreneurs Network. That's where future, whether you're on the workforce or you're on the enterprise side, get to be molded into the nuts and bolts of business, and at the same time of the principle of inclusive business. And now also we're talking of sustainable development and so on. So that's our main mandate. How do we multiply the face and the dukes of this world so that this become a really sustainable platform? And from where, of course, you cannot work alone. You need to have government on your side, because they're the ones who can provide incentives as well. In fact, my getting engaged in this is an invitation from the Philippines Board of Investment saying, "Here we're studying how to give incentives to those who are IB." So that's, in fact, the first time I get engaged. That was 4 years ago. So there are different tracks, but end of the day, we want this to become really some sort of a campaign, a sustained campaign in building more IB business and even social enterprises.
Thank you very much, Neil. But I think your organization is, of course, very important in creating the policy advocacy to ASEAN and to the policymakers around the region. From your experience, and I remember we wrote some report with you some years ago on inclusive business already. There were some numbers which suggested that already some 75% of companies were considering inclusive or sustainable business models when they were doing business. It was a small sample. We had like 200-300 respondents, but it already has a good indication. From your experience today, do you have more requests from businesses to learn more about mentoring in this area, of how to connect with smaller organizations? Is this something that you hear more, or it's the same?
Well, as you know, because of the pandemic, many things have been pulled back. So because many companies have shifted to survival mode, and how to even be able to get their basic business operating. But I think from the standpoint of ASEAN BAC, we're taking it as baby steps. There's a lot of things more that we need to do to really make IB as a top of mind management business strategy. Because as you know, we have already also launched our ASEAN IB Awards in our ASEAN Business Awards Gala night. We started 2 years ago. So we want to make sure that companies look at themselves to rebrand themselves as IB. Now, branding is a big game in business, and we want to be able to help in that regard. Even being able to launch this recognition platform, but it's a one-off as of today. So how do you sustain a platform where it can continually impact on people and give them a sense of fulfillment and of accomplishment, that they're really making a difference, but through the help of branding campaigns, media, social media, and so on. So we really create the appropriate noise in a more constant manner.
Thank you very much. It's nice to hear, and it's nice to hear that you're continuing doing this elements even following the COVID crisis and promoting this agenda. We're going to move all into the roundtables, which would allow us to have a discussion around some of the elements. I noticed that Francisco was quite active on the chat, and I'm inviting everyone to send their questions through the chat to the panelists, because it would allow us to ask them. And if you're interested to learn more about concrete examples, feel free to do so. Meanwhile, I wanted to kick off by maybe asking all of the panelists, if someone is interested, of what do you think, what do you need policymakers to do in order to help you to work more with inclusive businesses, and what needs to be done in order to create this? Maybe we will start with Amal, because maybe you can tell us about the general ecosystem approach that that could potentially be applied, and at least some of the core elements that should be looked after by the policymakers.
Thank you, Max. Well, I've heard a lot of very, very, very interesting things from Duke, from Ms. Feifei, and from Mr. Gonzalez, mostly on how to build the right conditions to sustain initiatives around inclusive business. I have to say that we at the OECD work exactly on the same very issues that you're talking about, and helping mostly states and governments, either in the OECD or outside the OECD, to build what we call the enabling environments for such businesses to grow. Well, my focus in the unit I'm in is on social entrepreneurship and social enterprises and social economy in general. But I mean, I can see a lot of bridges that can be built with inclusive business. So going back to your question, Max, first of all, I think we have to understand that building the policy environment is extremely local. It's very context sensitive. We have to take into consideration the needs of the stakeholders in each and every country. That it doesn't mean that we cannot build communities, and the ASEAN is doing it very well. It's building a community of states that are working together on creating these enabling environments, and trying even to start with something that's probably even here in Europe we heard about last week, which is mutual recognition. Meaning, can we create certifications that could be mutually recognized across countries so that transnational inclusive business could grow? So that's one question. The ecosystem approach. Well, the ecosystem approach is basically just to take the whole policy ecosystem as a whole and not to tackle just one bit of the problem on its own. You have to start, first of all, by raising awareness about what inclusive business is. I mean, we here as somehow an expert audience know what inclusive business is, know what social enterprises are, but the wider public, a lot of official policymakers still don't know what these concepts are about. So we need to raise their awareness. We need to really make these concepts very available and very, I would say, general public friendly, so people can go into them. Having said that, I've heard Ms. Feifei saying today that earlier on that the sense of community, the sense of working together is so strong in many countries in the ASEAN region that, you know, it's quite easy to build on something very essential, which is the social capital. So first of all, I think raising awareness, having an institutional framework, meaning either you scatter the competences around inclusive business and social enterprises around different ministries in a country or departments, or you create a single reference point. And a lot of countries have done it. So you can choose whatever approach you want, but at least your institutional context has to be clear to the stakeholders and to the newcomers, to those who want to create inclusive businesses, to companies who want to engage more in inclusive business, or to social enterprises who want to do more inclusive business. Legal frameworks. In the Europe, I know it's not your region, but you have a lot of very good examples in your region. Korea is one of them, for instance. But in Europe, I can tell you, for instance, today that you have 16 EU countries that have legislated on social enterprises. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and it's still not easy, because the definitions of what the contours of what a social enterprise is not always easy. It's always context based. The drivers can be cultural, can be historical, and can be even according to the tradition, to the legal tradition of each country, civil law versus common law, and so on. We can have a huge debate about that later on. Access to markets is very important. As Mr. Gonzalez said, we have to create the right conditions. Countries and policymakers have to create the right conditions for people to access the tailored finance, not just any type of finance. This is not the business of the fast and furious. This is the business of the slow and steady wins the race. So you need really slow capital to be there. And it has to be profitable. I agree 100% with Ms. Feifei, because otherwise it's not sustainable and not sustained. You need to have also access to markets. And this is where a lot of governments have done or have made a lot of efforts to have specific social clauses so that social enterprises can engage more in public procurement or private procurement. A lot has to be done still, but it's emerging. And actually in many countries, and I would go back, for instance, to the example of Korea, it's engaging with local government, for instance, that has enhanced the readiness and the ability of social enterprises to be more active and to be more visible. Business skills, business development. People can have the will to create this collective action, but they can lack skills. And they need to be accompanied. There has to be structures that really help these people who want to start this kind of business, which is extremely important, but extremely difficult at the same time. So these people have to be accompanied. So if you tackle all this, and still, of course, legal frameworks, for instance, or a law sometimes doesn't really just solve the problems. It's not because you have a law, that's it, you have done it, and everyone can engage in that kind of business. You still need to create tax incentives. You still need to create financial incentives. So it's all these elements that create the right enabling frameworks, and it takes years. And I think, as Mr. Gonzalez said, dialogue, sharing very good and best practices, peer learning, are very essential in engaging more countries in these policy areas. And there is no good or bad example, but we have to be able to share what works and what doesn't, so that countries can gain time in putting in place the right frameworks. And we at the OECD would be more than happy to share our experiences with you and work with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amal. Would you have some other comments? What would you need the governments to do? Which kind of policies? What would you think?
If you're asking me, we have a tool, for instance, we have a better entrepreneurship tool, for instance, that is free, that's out there, that countries can use to assess their ecosystem, for instance. We can assist also to help countries see where efforts can be made. So I would say we have to use the tools, and the tools exist, and we have to make them let's say ready. We have to make them also compatible with the needs of each region. Europe is not the Asean, and so on, and the MENA region is not Africa, and so on. So we need to just have in mind the tools exist out there. A lot of organizations have developed these tools. Some of them are very, very, very easy to use, but all this has to be context-based so that it really tackles the needs and the challenges of each region and each country.
Thank you very much, Emma. Duke, Faye, would you have some comments in relation to what you expect from the policymakers? Maybe we start with Duke.
Okay, sorry, I was not focused. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sorry, I was just asking what kind of expectations you have on the policymakers to make the better, easier.
All right. Well, I think I have to speak along the same line of what Amal has mentioned. I think that first of all, in order for the government to help with this agenda, I think Amal pretty much covered the three basics, which is market, knowledge, and finance. But I think that there are ways of trying to link them, just to make it more, I would say, just to give more incentive for the policymaker to really do their job. So, for example, if we're trying to link this with the SDGs, because I think it's quite clear that all the countries are subscribed to delivering the 2030 goals. And I also believe that by having I would say the inner business operation as social businesses or as social enterprises, they will be able to, in a way, achieve the SDG much easier than the traditional, normal, pure capitalism sort of ways. And I'm pretty sure that they can elaborate on this much more than I can. And how do we link that? I think number one, there can be two ways of doing it. I think number one is to let the market mechanism take place. So if you want to let the market mechanism take place, then what you can do is to try to create incentives along the way. Now in Thailand, there is a Social Enterprise Act. Within the Social Enterprise Act, there is a clause that allows government to have special procurement procedures for social enterprises that has registered with the government, that are registered with the government. So that's one of the way of trying to create incentive for the social enterprise to do that. Now I think it's driven from the SE up. But what we need to also do is to kind of do a platform elevation or a change in platform. And that has to do with the mainstream businesses. How can we create incentives for the big businesses to work with SE? So that is on creating incentive and try to create this market mechanism. Number two is just force them to say that the road has narrowed and you can no longer do business that create social or environmental impacts beyond certain scales. Now we here in Thailand, we are trying to lobby for an environmental law to push for cap and trade, for example. So if we are able to push for certain degrees of cap and trade, then we'll be able to promote the whole carbon trading industry, or trying to offset. If we try to push for if we try to take a similar concept on the social side, beyond the traditional law of if you have X amount of workers, you have to hire X amount of employees who are of certain status. Now, if we try to make this mainstream, I think that's another way of doing it, because frankly speaking, I don't really see how the current world business operation is going to sustain us for the next 50 or 60 years. I don't think there is going to be, ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit 50 years from now, because we would all be extinct. So we need to change the way we operate our businesses. And there are two ways of creating incentive, or basically just force them to do that.
Thank you very much. Very much agree, and it's about a lot about mainstreaming, and that was the title of our conference last week, precisely about the mainstreaming of the social economy and how it can bring added value. So, I mean, it's interesting to this to see this reflection, and it's great to see that Thailand is moving ahead with this. Faye, would you have some other comments?
Yeah, I definitely echo a lot of what Amal and Duke has said, particularly around taking this ecosystems approach, again, putting farmers at the center, communities, and the institutional or macro sort of elements, mapping out the interdependencies, understanding that there are areas we need to intervene directly, and there are areas we need to influence or partner. It's definitely the way to go. But any partnership and and on top of that, we have to operate at different levels, of both at the national policy level as well as at the local government level in terms of implementation of these interventions. One of the learnings maybe I would like to add is that you obviously need a good convener, and this convener is able to bring and build this trust-based relationship. Having worked 10, 15 years with the IFAD and with the Ministry of Agriculture and a number of other ministries in Indonesia, I think they're starting to have a view that, yeah, maybe businesses is not all that bad, and that we have a mutual interest in ensuring that farming communities have a thriving livelihood. But having a shared vision alone isn't enough. You need to have shared measures and data. Well, you need to have data-driven or science-based driven approaches, as well as shared measures of success. And I want to draw on a particular example. We work through IFAD and the Ministry of Agriculture in Indonesia, where we are working to train the government extension on improving the extension services to farmers. And a lot of the measures we had to talk about had to move away from just how many farmers you can reach to what's the adoption level. And we started to, introduce some of the techniques that Mars do, a rapid, what we call adoption observation technique. We started to look at the data that was coming through to see what's the effectiveness of this extension. And we started to have this adaptive management approach, which is quite normal in a business and setting, but quite novel in the government setting. And we were now looking at data and saying, oh, in this area, we need to improve on that. And the data is showing us. And so I think even at the national level, sharing tools, having shared vision and measures of success is quite important. I moved to a local government example where we started to take what we call a jurisdictional sustainable management approach, where we start to look at the whole jurisdiction and look at how we could bring in, besides cocoa, other diversified crop and income to in an agroforestry model in cocoa. So bringing more, trees and timber and forest back into the system. And the idea here again is you need that level of science-based decision-making, shared vision, but also that we work hand in hand. And we've started to talk about, okay, besides Ministry of Agriculture, let's bring in the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. We will need the Ministry of, SME Development. And so then at the implementation level, the conversation starts to talk about what does a jurisdictional approach look like? And this is where, again, government and policymakers can come in with incentives. We all want a more, a thriving community and a healthy planet. So what does that look like if we were to take a slightly more, one higher level beyond the little smallholders that we've been looking at? So end of the day, it's still trust-based relationships that matter, but these having a unity in vision has to translate into unity of strategy and action, and that for that you need some clear measures of adoption, or you need clear measures of natural and other social capital beyond the financial capitals that we are familiar with. Hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Faye. Actually, it's a very hot subject. And just for your information, we have colleagues working in social impact measurement international guide, which will be out next year. There are a lot of discussions. There are a lot of frameworks. There's no one framework that fits all sectors, all people, but there are some principles which are very useful. And it is indeed very important, because one of the common elements that also Amal mentioned before was precisely that we all speak about social or environmental impact. So we have to be able to measure it because that's the core of it. That's why we do it. And for social enterprises, that's the reason they are often starting a business. And that's something which is I fully agree with you, which is very important. Hill, what about you? Would you have some messages to the policymakers or around this subject?
Well, on the policy stream, as you know, that's a very slow burn track. But perhaps you can just ride on existing mechanisms. If I can use sustainability as a overarching umbrella theme, you know, ASEAN, for listed companies, they're now required to come up with an annual sustainability report. So these are the big boys and the conglomerates, the listed companies. Part of that report are governance issues, environment, and social. If we are able to insert there an item on inclusive business with some questions and so on, which translates to a scorecard, by the way. Meaning to say inclusive business is not mandated per se, but there's a recognition for conglomerates who are into inclusive business. Of course, there should be clear definition and so on and so forth. So if you want to broaden the awareness immediately in ASEAN, there's a way we could deal with regulators and say, okay, make inclusive as part of the annual sustainability reporting of conglomerates. Okay, that's one stream. It's already there. We can simply ride on. Now, I like, of course, the things that happens on the ground. And I agree that there's no one size fits all for inclusive business, especially at local government. So I agree very much with Faye that there are cultural considerations and so on and so forth. Now, if local governments can have some kind of a, you know, again, an umbrella strategy on how local governments can promote, how they can recognize, how can they support through mentoring and whatever resources, whether access to finance or access to incentives, that it should be able to, but of course you have to take baby steps. These are medium-term views. But all countries need to ever identify champions. The number one requirement in any advocacy is a champion. It's a private sector champion. You bring in the equation, government, fantastic, knowledge partners, OECD, things will, you know, start to roll. Now that I think G20, OECD, all of the APEC have already embraced inclusive business. So, you know, so what is ASEAN waiting for? So meaning to say, it should now start to infect this back. And of course, there's RCEP. Okay, but let's get that things into force first before we start. Okay, RCEP, you should also be in inclusive business. But there are, I think there are some a bit of shortcuts. But for me, okay, because policy takes a, you know, I've gone through the policy dance, and it's a tough route. But what for me are seeing guys like Duke and Faye making a difference at the ground level. For me, that's the one that will really has a more sustainable impact. So that's my share.
Thank you, Michael. But I think also you mentioned about the need to have local leaders at the local ground. And I know that ASEAN BAC also organizes the ASEAN Inclusive Business Award, right? And there are a number of companies which have been highlighted on a yearly basis per country to showcase concrete examples. And if I'm not mistaken, I think even this year, there's this additional social entrepreneurship, young social entrepreneurship award, which has been also planned, at least by that. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. But all of this requires scale. Huh? I think our awards, even now, you know, that we're in this COVID, we undertake our gala night virtually. How can you have a gala night virtually, you know, and giving the awards and making people who are giving them the due recognition they deserve under a virtual platform. So it doesn't have the same impact. But you know, it has its own merits, but we should be able to spread it in a more effective and sustained way. It's for me right now. Yes, we have the awards, but still a one-off. So how do you build on it? How do we make it a local awards, if you can even say that? Huh? You know, we recognize local leaders who are championing. These are different streams now, but you need to have a champion who's self-propelled, huh? Who can do things on their own and just needs the tools that Amal was talking about. They just need to get advice, best practice. Where do they go to enrich themselves with the beauty of IT?
Thanks a lot, Hill. Indeed, scaling is crucial, and that's what our session is also about. And it's all I've been listening to earlier sessions today of the Inclusive Business Summit, and there were a lot of young entrepreneurs, some of them social enterprises, who were saying how difficult it was for them to actually start. They had to start with crowdfunding or with their own funds from garage. It's always still a very relevant story. I see one of the questions that popped up, and the situation in Europe or in the OECD countries is a little bit different in a sense that compared to ASEAN region. Based on the ASEAN SME Policy Index, when we conducted the study, we noticed that actually there are programs that support specifically social enterprise, but they're much fewer. In Europe, it's much more common to find, or in some of the ASEAN, OECD countries, support mechanisms that provide funding to early stage enterprises. But today, I was really pleased to hear about one example, for example, from Thailand, which received seed funding of some 4,000 euros, which helped them really to start their business. Now, I see one of the questions is that, are any of the speakers aware of any social enterprise recovery fund to bear the consequences of COVID or to start the business in ASEAN? Anyone wants to respond? I'm particularly not aware of any specific fund dedicated to that.
Well, we can ask ASEAN Secretariat to, you know, there's this ASEAN COVID Recovery Fund, and its primary use is to buy vaccines. Okay, if you can convince ASEAN to, can you give us a slice of that? Promote this, but I don't know. So far, that's the only fund that's working, but more directed towards the vaccines.
Okay. I know, however, that ASEAN has just launched the first ASEAN Social Enterprise Development Program, which is focused, but it's still very small and small scale. It is focused on some 20 social enterprises, helping them nourish, promote, and get developed. And we're actually organizing an event with them on the 14th of October, precisely to share this experience. I know that some funding, it's more in terms of technical assistance, is available to that. And some of the other questions that were received also relate to the necessity to embed the inclusive business and social entrepreneurship into the secondary or primary education. Any views on that from the panelists? Faye, I see that you want to mention something.
Yes, start early, right? In the case of Indonesia, we start, because, national curriculum don't really allow us to get into primary or secondary education, we start at the vocational school point, vocational polytechnics, which is where we look at, they allow some form of 20% of what we call local content. And so what we did was we partnered with a number of vocational schools in the cocoa growing areas, introduced agriculture in the curriculum, and then we pivoted towards a STEM curriculum where it is science, technology, engineering, math, but also with a business and the sort of the social element embedded in. And what was quite interesting was, and I put in the link, is this study on youth development assets. And clearly, this study completely changed our view around that actually youth are interested in farming. A lot of times, the opportunity and the education wasn't there to support it. And, it sort of broke a lot of myths that we had that, youth just want to leave the village and pursue the cities. No, they don't. If they had the opportunity in the village to contribute back to their communities, they do. But they are facing a number of barriers, like barriers to land and knowledge and finance and, you know, jobs. And so how do we then utilize all these assets, again, coming back to community assets and social assets, to businesses could do to incubate, partner with schools to educate, and then incubate some of these brilliant ideas that can contribute back to your own community. And I can just tell you that from some of our learning, youth, they network very quickly and easily. You find one, you find the networks of those who are interested in social entrepreneurship. You train one, they train each other. They start up, you know, all sorts of different ideas. They need to be given the support, clearly, the accompaniment. But again, they are young, they can afford to fail. And we, with really not a lot of capital, could really help some of these youth take up, you know, some of these businesses, both girl youth and boys, because another interesting study out of that was equal amounts of girls were interested in farming as well as boys. So, but they want to do it differently from their, you know, how their parents used to do it. They want to bring technology in, they want to do farming differently. So I think, you know, clearly it's just going back to the point that you do need to bring education in, and policymakers, companies would like to partner with policymakers to see how can that be integrated, not take over the curriculum, but rather how can we integrate farming, social aspects, and business into curriculum wherever is the right entry point. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Faye. We have about 10 minutes more, and I want to have one more aspect to discuss, because we speak about scaling and creating partnerships. What needs to be done in order to create partnerships? We see effectively that Mars works together with local farmers, that your foundation is inspiring a lot of social enterprise and creates these partnerships also with some other elements. We've seen that also in a number of our research. What needs to be done to create more of this partnership? Is it about money or is it about something else? It's about networks potentially. Anyone wants to pick that question?
Yeah, I'll take a jab at this. I think it's a combination of everything. I don't think that we can design for there is a particular solution to do that. But of course, number one is to look from within. You need to be able to produce product of value to your potential partner first. So I would say that, you know, for all of us working out there, I think we need to be able to, we need to focus a lot on delivering quality and differentiating our value proposition. If you look at it in terms of the marketing aspect. And then after that, once you're, I mean, for us, what we're trying to do is we're trying to position ourselves in a very, very unique situation that would meet, I would say, future needs. So today it's all about climate issues. It's all about inclusiveness, you know. So we're trying to gear our business towards that direction. So starting 4 or 5 years ago, we started looking at our footprint very, very seriously. And we became, you know, zero waste to landfill in 2018. This year we'll become carbon neutral. 40% of our products are from circular economy. So if we started to see the trend, and if we move ahead of those curves, we will be one of a few, you know, that are out there when companies do start to look for this type of things. And it's not something that, you know, takes, it's not a rocket scientist. You need to just be able to read the situation. You know that, you know, the SDGs are out there. It has been out there, right? And you know that this is something that eventually some people are going to start, you know, looking to look for, right? So, you know, I think that's number one. Number two, I think it's just to be able to simplify how can we make use of technologies. A lot of times, you know, big companies are not really wanting to do something too difficult. You know, they don't want to go in there and walk the ground and you know, they would like to go there from time to time, but they don't want to be permanently there. So being able to use rely on technology, data to be able to follow without having to be there in present. You know, it helps a lot. Again, for us, we shifted our reporting system towards you know, using satellites, using GIS, using available technologies, which is not very expensive at all. You know, you walk around with a SIM card, and then you are able to take photos, see it in real time, you know, follow the progress. And then these are things that, you know, makes it easier for the partner. Again, it goes back to providing you know, the value proposition. For us, it's easier to work with us. We have, you know, a very clear way of quantifying the impact, a very transparent way of sharing the information. You know, I think it's a little bit of this, and yes, we need connection. You know, so platforms like this, how can we bring big businesses, something similar to, you know, Mars, you know, coming in and looking for us. We need partners like this to be more vocal. You know, saying that we're open, we're looking for partnerships. And we want, you know, to look for social businesses or social enterprises in particular fields, you know. And then why don't you, if you're out there, come to us, you know. I think these are you know, sort of ways of trying to create this kind of movement.
Thanks a lot, Dirk. Indeed, you before we spoke about the need for data for us to prove it, but as you mentioned, indeed, technologies help us a lot, and it can really give us a lot of new information. And we have quite a bit of information now on a bit more information on data and social entrepreneurship. Amal, would you like to mention something about the work that we do around the data and the need to get the right data? Sorry, your micro. Sorry, I don't think we hear you for some reason. It just doesn't work. Maybe if you mute or unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Now,
yes. Sorry. So I was just saying that we need data, first of all, to inform policy. Data is extremely important to inform policy. So we need to, all data that we can gather on the trends, who is involved in inclusive business, social entrepreneurship, social enterprises, the types of profiles and the types of sectors, the participation to creation of employment and so on, these are very important elements to help design policy and policy frameworks. So that's the first point. But then we need data also to measure and evaluate. I think it's very, very important now that ASEAN is trying to create this you know, effective space for inclusive business and social entrepreneurship and social enterprises and social entrepreneurs to come in and to engage more and to create more business. I think evaluation of policies is extremely important. And this can be done through specific data and sets of approaches to either measure specific types of impacts, and not only the economic or market impacts. We need to measure also the non-market impacts, such as social impact, for instance. And last point, I think that OECD, for instance, will be developing international guidance, and we will be publishing an international guide on legal frameworks for social economy, and also a manual on legal frameworks specifically for social enterprises by the end of this year. We will also publish an international guide on social impact measurement next year. This international guidance is there to help countries learn from each other. Again, I mean, there is no, and I agree 100% that there is no one size fits all situation, but we are trying to put out there as many experiences as possible and practices as possible, and also to somehow help charter some sort of a path for policymakers globally to know how to better tailor policy to the needs of either inclusive business entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs. And we hope to engage more with you so that, first of all, we can learn from your experience, and I think a lot of OECD countries can learn from your experience, and we can provide you also with the experiences of OECD countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amal. We're getting close to the end because we have about 3 minutes and a half. And before I conclude, I was wondering if any of the speakers would like to add some of the important elements to this discussion, or that you have not had a chance yet to mention.
Yeah, I was just going to echo the point about we are all on this learning journey. None of us have the answers. If we did, brilliant, but clearly we don't. And that it's going to be partnerships that is going to make the difference, especially those shared vision and shared measures and action. The world we want is inclusive. Ultimately, we all have to get on that path. It's not about who's there first or who's a latecomer. Some are taking initial steps to pilot different models, some are and offer some learning, but it doesn't mean that those who come later will have less to offer in terms of learning. They can help us accelerate different parts of the ecosystem that we also need to learn about. So I think there was a question on should we clip, big multinationals. I think everyone can bring a role to play. Everyone has a role to play, and that we all can offer something different. Big multinationals can bring in technology and resources and really global thinking and different ways of approaching things. And we ultimately want everyone to also come on board. So and like you said, going together will give us a lasting impact. So it's not a race to the end, it's a race for let's all collect for our collective future. So learning, having a clear learning agenda and partnering to get there is the way to go.
Thank you very much, Faye. Fully agree with you. Fully agree with you. It's not as easy as it might seem, and we all have to learn and learn from each other, from different regions, from different countries. With this, I think we have about 1 minute and a half. So I would just would like to conclude that thank you very much, first of all, to all the panelists. It was an interesting, very interesting panel. We learned a lot. We spoke about a variety of approaches of how larger companies can engage with social enterprises, how social enterprises can be better linked with the larger companies, how the policy agenda should be better improved, and the key elements that from the discussion, the kind of the key messages that we will pass to the policymakers, that there is still a huge need to develop tools, that there is a need to develop right set of skills and engage it as soon as possible into the education. We've spoken about the fact that social enterprises are very often very locally integrated, and they need we need to reach out to them and in order to understand the setup in which they have been created and why they operate like this, because you cannot just internationalize them as such, and for that you might need some specific infrastructure helping them measuring their social impact and gathering, and we need some technical data in order to basically have better metrics and data for various reasons. For the enterprises on one side to improve the way they do things, but on the other side to inform the policymakers of where is the impact and where really needs to be done. Legal frameworks and legal basis and a mandated institution is always very important as well in the country, and we will continue working on this. And we will be organizing soon a webinar specifically focused on the more hands-on practices on social entrepreneurship on the 14th of October with the Asean. And I will invite you there. I will send the link later on. And meanwhile, well, thank you so much. I would like to also thank the panelists, to thank the participants for active participation and asking us questions and integrating points into the chat, and the organizers. It's been a great pleasure to work with iBAN, with the UN ESCAP, and of course, Brunei Darussalam organizing it all. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Max, everybody.